Hello, my name is Georgina Spentzou, and I'm a coach, a trainer, and a psychotherapist. And today I'm here with Ibrahim, a dear friend and also an INSEAD alumnus. And we're going to be talking about exciting things. And we're going to be talking about limiting beliefs and how they get in the way of our success. But then if we use them wisely, they can become a leverage of success. So, first, let me introduce Ibrahim. So, Ibrahim is the managing partner of Moonbase Capital. And Ibrahim, could you briefly tell us what Moonbase Capital does?
So Moonbase Capital invests in something called search funds, which basically means we work closely with entrepreneurs who look for a company to buy and then eventually become the CEOs of this company. So we work a lot with young executives who have the dream of becoming CEOs and want to buy their own company. It's a new type of entrepreneurship.
Young and ambitious, right?
Yeah. Yep, exactly.
Perfect. And typically, how old are they on average?
30s. So I'd say on the average, they're in the 30s. So anywhere between 32 to 38. I mean, there is people in the 20s and there are people in the 40s, but I think 30s is the most common.
Wow. Okay. Perfect. So let's talk about the limiting beliefs. First of all, could you please tell us about your TEDx talk? Because Ibrahim did a fantastic TEDx talk. Unfortunately, it was in Arabic and I don't know how to speak Arabic yet. I did try to learn it during the lockdown, but it was too hard. So can you tell us about your TEDx talk?
So a number of years ago, I was working with a healer, a therapist, a friend of mine who taught me a trick. She told me basically that each one of us as a kid makes a decision. The decision starts with the words I am. So it can be I am weak, it can be I am incompetent, it can be I am invisible, it can be a lot of things. And it's a self-belief on your own, on yourself. And she taught me that this decision, she calls it the decision, this decision, we live with it our whole life. And it becomes the filter that we see the world through. So, for example, if someone says I am weak, then in every encounter, they will present themselves in this encounter as a weak person, which means if someone shows any sign of strength, maybe they will be upset or they will fight, or if someone is too weak, they won't respect them. So this whole weakness and strength becomes the lens they see themselves. And I this really changed my life, because from that moment until today, I saw one or two or three things which I really believed about myself. And then once I figured out that this was the lens I had and I changed it, my whole life changed. So yeah, this was the topic of my TEDx.
I love the topic. And I mean, these limiting beliefs in psychotherapy, in psychology, we call them core beliefs, because they're very fundamental beliefs about ourselves. And exactly, they become the lens through which we see the world. And in coaching, we call them limiting beliefs, because like the vast majority of the times when we talk about these core beliefs, they are negative beliefs about ourselves. So we see ourselves as lacking in something, as not being good enough, as not being smart enough, as not being, competent enough, skilled enough. So yeah, that can be quite a challenge actually, but it's really, there's good news and bad news. Okay, so the bad news is that every one of us has a limiting belief, because, and of course, we're not born, we're not born with these beliefs. Like, can you imagine a baby thinking I'm not good enough? No way.
No.
These beliefs are being developed throughout our childhood, from the experiences with our caregivers, the parents, who are the first authority figures that we encounter, and then we have the teachers, and so on and so forth. So,
100%.
yeah.
I mean, for me, it's very interesting how we can have very normal interactions that would make you see the world in a certain way, and then live your whole life without knowing that you see it this way, and it affects everything around you. And it's very interesting how, as you said, it happens sometimes at an age where you don't even remember what happened, but you stay your whole life under the influence, let's say, of this belief.
The spell of the limiting belief. So in my case, Ibrahim, because I think it's really important that we're being like very vulnerable in this podcast, like just and say things as they are. And so because I think it's very important that all people come out eventually and acknowledge their limiting beliefs and then learn how to live with them and go beyond them. Yeah. So in my case, my limiting belief was I'm not good enough. And that limiting belief stemmed from the fact that I grew up in a family that had extremely unrelenting standards. So the standards, especially by my mother, she's very demanding as a person, especially when she was younger. So, she had these unrelenting standards that were being imposed on my sister and me. And we always had this feeling that we have to do more, like struggle and do more. Like, for example, I remember at some point after my studies in the UK in City University, I was, thinking what to do next in terms of postgraduate studies. And then my mother's like, okay, so you girls go to Harvard now and do an MBA. I'm like, yeah, I don't want to do that. She was like, what? I can't believe you don't want to do an MBA. What is wrong with you? You don't want to go to Harvard. And, so this pressure somehow was always there inside of me and making me feel that I need to do more. Like it was not enough. So eventually I did go to INSEAD. So, so we can pretty much agree that this influence was very much exerted in me and became a part of me, right? So tell me about your limiting belief and how do you believe that it was formed in your childhood?
I went to a German school as a young kid, and the German school was quite pushy in terms of education. So I needed to conform to a specific type of person. At the same time, I came from a family which was very strong in education. I mean, my grandfather, he was the number one. He was the first on his whole academic year in university. He was first in he was a doctor, so he was the first in terms of his class, and my uncle was the same, and my whole family. So
Oh,
growing up, from one side, I had a family which was all talking about their huge success in education, and then I went to a German school which I was not able to, let's say, show the same results, even though now it makes sense because I am not someone who can be confined to a classroom. However, this made me decide, which I figured out just recently. Yeah? But basically, the decision I made was that I am inadequate, and it's very interesting here. I think the word is very important because it took me months of trying to figure out what the belief was,
mm,
and as soon as the word inadequate came, it's not there's many things close to it, but once you know the word, you just resonate. So inadequate was the one for me, and I lived my whole life as someone who's inadequate. So I failed fourth grade. I was always the bottom of my class, all the way until unless there is one year where I really had a motive, but in general, I was not a good student until I started working with my father in his business, small business with maybe 40, 50 employees. And after working for a while, I was sent to the factory to become factory manager or just to upgrade the factory. And this was for the first time in my life that I saw that I was actually quite good at something. And it changed my life because suddenly I was like, okay, I'm actually more than adequate in this field, but I need to learn. I need to really become good. And the feeling of wow, I'm not that bad. I remember clearly and my father never gave me this satisfaction. So he, even in the midst of this, when I was like, look at what I'm doing, I'm so good. He was like, it's normal. And I am not blaming him because he was just pushing me forward. But it made me feel that no, I don't need anyone's approval. I know obviously I can be good. And then I decided to go and I did INSEAD at this point. And then after that, I wanted to learn more. So I joined McKinsey as a consultant for 4 years, working really hard. And then after that, I went back to the family business, again, working really hard, doing over 10 years of the CEO job. And we did really well. And then I went and did another master's at Stanford. And all of this, I think, was my way of being happy that there is something where I'm good at and trying to celebrate that by becoming really good at. So my whole life was, I will be the best when it comes to managing a company or the art of managing companies and working in that. And yeah, so it affected me quite a bit.
Something, Ibrahim. Do you think that the fact that you went to INSEAD was coming from a place of insecurity, in the sense that you were trying to prove to yourself that you are adequate? You know what I mean? Was the motivation like to prove like that you're not inadequate by joining such an Ivy business school?
No, it was not that. That's the interesting thing about the words. It was a passion of being good at something, because I lived my whole life deep inside believing I'm not good at anything. So I was not good at sports. I was not good at my grades were not good. Again, naturally, my family was always pushing me, so they always made me feel I can do better. So my whole life was I was not good, or I was inadequate. When I found something where I'm actually really good at, because at this year alone in the factory, it was very hard, and I did a lot of things which I was like, wow, in terms of leading people and doing change. And so for me, it was more of, I want to be the best at that, because finally I found that there is something I can be good at. I never cared about the name INSEAD. Actually, I didn't know INSEAD even, and I never thought of going to something like Harvard with a better name. And for me, it was simply, I will become the best at this part, which is leading people, managing a small company, going back and taking my father's company and making it a big thing, because finally I'm good at something. So yeah, so it was not the brand, or not the fact that I was part of INSEAD at all. Actually, nobody I knew INSEAD, and afterwards, most of the people I knew wouldn't know INSEAD. But this was the best school at the time, was number one. And I wanted to go to the best and learn the best with the best to be able to compete with the best. So I was like, you can become the best at this. So do your best. So yeah.
Yeah. But you know what I'm thinking now is that sometimes we tend to overcompensate for these limiting beliefs by like putting on so much effort and, trying to be the best. And like sometimes I mean, in my case, I felt that I was like overcompensating a lot, trying to prove that I'm good enough. And this like exhausted me. So I ended up having 4 master's degrees. I even started a PhD. And then at some point, like 1 year ahead, when I started my PhD, I was like, do you really want to do a PhD? I think I'm done with my 4 masters, I think that's enough for now. And that's where I ended up realizing that all this extra effort that I was putting in, all this overcompensation was coming from a place of fear and insecurity, that I needed to prove myself, that I am good enough, And, it really became exhausting, and it really affected my work-life balance a lot. Like at some point I was doing 2 masters in a single year.
Wow.
And I remember myself struggling with the thesis, to submit. And at some point I got really exhausted and angry with myself. And I was thinking, why am I doing this to myself? I need to cut myself some slack. I need to be able to enjoy life. Because, sometimes you get so much caught up in these results and this ambition and this desire to do all these things that you forget about yourself, your enjoyment, your friends, your partner. You know what I mean?
100%. I mean, that's what I love so much about this topic, is that each one can have this. I mean, we can both have the exact same experience, and then I will see it in a slightly different way than you, or it will affect me slightly different. So for me, it was never about proving anyone to anyone. I was actually, I think I was so unsure of myself that even to try to show anyone anything was useless. So I used to hate to compete, for example. I never knew why I don't like to compete. Now it makes sense, because probably I thought I was so bad that I would lose anyways. And so I never had anything to do with how people see me. I never cared about it, really. I think I was more of, I was proving it to myself. And it really showed when I decided to go to Stanford, because I remember clearly when I decided to go to Stanford, what I told myself was, if you really think you're really good at this, running a business and leading a business, then go and do it in the toughest place on earth, which is Silicon Valley. So it all came of, go to the World Cup, basically. If you think you're good, now go to the toughest place. How do you go to the toughest place? Go through Stanford. So even Stanford was never the brand. I mean, I recognize how the brand is strong, but it was never the thing. It was more of, go to the toughest place and prove for yourself there, and Stanford was a way to get into Silicon Valley. So yeah, so I love it because it could have been, you know what I mean? Like the same exact situation can happen to two people. One would take it very internal and very, you know, in a geeky way. And someone else would be more of, no, I want to show the people that I'm competent. With me, this didn't happen. And the beauty is it's pure luck. The pure luck, because people sometimes judge how these decisions happen, or how people see themselves as, yeah, this guy is showy. Yeah, people never choose. I mean, you as a kid, something happens to you, and then you decide that the best way to live my life is to show everyone that I'm good. Or someone else would be, I want to rebel and show everyone that I don't care. Or someone else would be, I will, you know what I mean? I will close and I not even deal with anyone else. And this can happen to 3-4 people, although they all had the exact same experience. And that's why it's also so hard to unwind, because one of the things I talked about in the TEDx is what process you should take to figure out this, and it really depends on you. And yeah, that's why this is so amazing, this whole discussion.
You know what? It could be the other way around. So a person with a limiting belief that I am inadequate could possibly have ended up in basically doing nothing with their life, like being really disappointed and discouraged and not having basically, you know, the drive to try things out and just hide. You know, I have many of my clients in coaching, leaders, that we do leadership coaching, and you know, initially they're very fearful and they're very shameful, and you know, although they have a clear purpose and a clear mission, on the other hand, they're terrified of being judged, of being criticized, and it always goes back to the limiting belief. Like, if you have the limiting belief, I'm inadequate, it's very hard for you to, you know, go to social media and talk about the things that you're passionate about. And I think, you know, in order to do that, in order to push yourself and go way beyond your limiting belief, I think it needs to be connected somehow to your purpose. So it needs to be something that is bigger than you. Do you agree with that belief?
Not only that, I agree 100%, but I would even take it further, which is, I'm a believer of the soft part of life. So I even think that these limiting beliefs have a role in reaching our passions or our goals or our aspirations. Because in my case, for example, the fact that I wanted to become good at that put me today in exactly where I want to be, which is, I would love, you know, what I'm doing now could not have been possible without this limiting belief making me move toward life in this route, which I never chose, which just came by total chance. I cannot even take credit for it. And it all came through this limiting belief that now put me in a situation where I cannot be happier. I mean, I never thought I would be open to be publicly speak about leadership and about other topics. And this came somehow through, it started at Stanford, but it's all through this route that I didn't choose. So my theory would say that if universe wants to push you in a certain direction, so you come to this world with, you know, a higher power wanting to push you somewhere, the way it will be done is through a situation that will put you in a limiting belief that will make you go in a certain route that you have no clue about. And then eventually it could lead you there. And of course, I'm saying it could because, as you said, limiting belief could either destroy you or can be the propeller that pushes you somewhere. So many people can have a limiting belief, and this limiting belief will be the reason why they will go under, because they will submit to it. They will not push through it. And some other person would be like, which like happened to you, is like, no, I will fight. I will do masters. I will prove to myself and to everyone else that I'm good. And the same as what happened to me and you pushed us to be somewhere which is nice. But I even believe it's part of the plan of how humans should be moving in one direction or another. And yeah, so I actually, yeah, so I agree with you.
You know, Ibrahim, you talk a lot about luck. And, you know, I read this fantastic quote saying that luck is the combination. No, actually, it was saying luck is when readiness meets opportunity. And I really agree with that. And I also think that another thing that we need to take into consideration with luck is the fact that apart from readiness and opportunity, I think you also need to be brave enough to take the opportunity, to
100%.
grab, to seize the opportunity. Because I think mindset is very important when it comes to opportunity, because, many times people are faced with fantastic opportunities and yet they feel, they're not ready, they're not good enough, they're intimidated, let's say, if the opportunity is like too shiny, you know what I mean? And they're like, oh, should I go for this opportunity? Maybe it's too much for me. Maybe I'm too little, too small for it. You know what I mean?
No, 100%. I agree with you 100%. People sabotage themselves a lot. And I've seen it because I have done these things that people are like, wow, he went this or he did that. And many people are like, how can you at the age of 45 I have 4 kids, take the kids and go to Stanford and live in the dorms, and you know what I mean? And these are beliefs that they put in their own mind. It's like, it's so hard. It's not so hard. I mean, of course, it requires, as you said, to jump on the opportunity and try to do the best out of it. But for many people, they won't even try. They're like, it's so hard to do the GMAT. I know, but it's doable. I mean, if you really want, you will do it. So I agree with you. I think many people they sabotage themselves.
I think sabotage is such a huge chapter that we need to do a separate podcast for that, because I have many things to say on self-sabotage. I used to be the queen of self-sabotage, and all my clients are, of course, very good at sabotaging themselves. And I think, one of the factors, one of the root causes of sabotage is these limiting beliefs again, because, they, exactly as you said, they become the filters of ourselves and the way we see the world. And sometimes, we get so caught up in these beliefs that we think that, there's nothing beyond that. And, the interesting things is that we might get good feedback. Like, for example, let's say that we might, do a fantastic presentation and, and get really good feedback on that. You did so good in this presentation. It was so inspiring, so empowering. Okay. And we get this fantastic feedback. And then sometimes the limiting beliefs we also get in that way of the feedback and say, was it really that good? Or is she being polite with me? Huh?
100%.
Isn't that
100%.
fascinating? I mean,
and yeah, I know it's fascinating, and it's also scary because I agree with you 100%. I mean, same sentence can be said to 2 people, and one would, if you believe it happened to me a lot. I mean, feeling I was inadequate, I would be very defensive if someone touches on me being inadequate. So I was defensive. It took me years to learn not to be defensive and to take feedback and to be open. But on the other hand, if anyone gave me a good or a compliment, I would always dismiss it as he's being polite, or I would find, even if someone would say a compliment, I would stop them and then start saying things of, yeah, thank you, but I am bad at 1, 2, 3. I always make it a point to point out the things that I'm bad at. Not anymore, but this was my whole life. So I agree with you. 100%.
Interesting. So even though you got a very good compliment, you would focus on the things that you didn't do well, that you were inadequate at, just to prove your limiting belief, right?
And I would say it. I would even say it. So I would point out to the person that it was luck, or no, it was not that hard. If someone says, "Oh wow, you did that," I would not say, "Yeah, I'm proud of it." I would say, "No, but I was lucky because blah blah blah." And you know what I mean? I try even to give excuses to why. No, this does not mean I'm good, because I think self-identity is another point which could take a full session. But if you identify as something, anything that would hit this self-identity, you would automatically, fight or talk against. So, for example, in my case, if I believe in my heart that I'm inadequate, and by the way, if you believe you're inadequate, probably you don't know it mentally. It's just like a very deep. But if you believe inside that you're inadequate, and someone says something of the contrary to that, you would not accept it and you would fight it naturally, because it's not, you believe it's not the truth. And this happens on both sides. So sometimes it makes people go very positive or very negative, but it's also, it's one other amazing, this whole identity, and how if something crashes with your identity, you can fight it quite easily.
You resist it and you're trying to prove that, no, that's not the way it is, And, sometimes I think, when my coaching clients, especially leaders, are, kind of requested to do something that is, kind of difficult for them, like it's the very first time that they're doing it. And there's always, this element of resistance. and they're struggling and like, oh, you know what, I don't know if I want to get on TV, or I'm not sure I want to do this video podcast, I'm not confident, I'm not good at talking, let's say, in video podcasts. And then sometimes because of the fact that these limiting beliefs kind of prevent you from being objective with yourself, sometimes I'm like, okay, forget about yourself and what you think about yourself. Tell me about the feedback that you've gotten from other people. So let's talk about that, okay? And then, so they start giving these examples. Actually, I'm not so bad when it comes to presentations. Like, I'm very good at them. And, there's all this evidence gathered that is actually proving the exact opposite from the belief or the fear.
The problem is that, at least in my case, so one of the beliefs I had was a bit of a victim mentality. So I always believed that it was something on the side of I am unjust or injustice. And as until I figured out that that's a limiting belief, there was no way that you could have convinced me that something was, as a kid, something was just. So, for example, anything that happened to me. So I believe if you have a limiting belief and you don't tackle it, it's very hard, even with a lot of proof, to come and say, yeah, I mean, proof doesn't, it's very interesting. People are almost irrational because you show someone, I worked with friends who had, for example, a lady, I remember, she was really beautiful. She was really good looking and she believed that she was ugly. And no matter how I can prove it to her, no matter, I can get her people, I ask, she would always not believe it. And until she figured out on her own that she had this limiting belief, and then clicked. Once it clicked, it solved itself, let's say. So the proof made sense. Before that, I think it's very hard to prove to someone something against the belief they have.
Exactly. Ibrahim, give me an example of this injustice that you talked about. You talked about this sense of injustice that you had, this belief.
That's actually an interesting story. So I worked with my therapist, healer, Mayana is her name, in English. And the word that really clicked with me was in Arabic. So I worked for like 2 months, not able to get the word. And that's also why in English, it's not injustice. It's injustice, but I can't say the word. But it's basically ana mazloom. Mazloom is means injustice in Arabic. But this is, once I said the word mazloom, which clinked, it just, everything was, no, because then it was clear. I am lucky in everything. I really am. In people, everything. I don't need to mention now, but I really now believe I'm one of the luckiest people alive. And until I noticed this word and it came out of my mouth, and I'm like, wow. And it happened because I was talking about my son. So I lived my whole life. Anything that negative would happen to me, automatically I would go to the conclusion that it's because the world is unjust to me personally. So if a teacher would ask me to leave the class because I was fooling around for half an hour, my mind would never go to the conclusion that I was fooling around for half an hour, but would be, this teacher doesn't like me because she's German and she doesn't like Egyptians, or because I am I have character and she doesn't like people with anything. Like, I'd always find the reason to prove 100% with good arguments that it has nothing to do with me being bad, but more about this teacher being unjust. And once I uttered the word, I am ana mazloom, which is I am unjustly treated, but it has one word in it. Once I said it, and it just hit me. And then naturally I started reflecting on that, reflecting on my life and saying, no, I cannot say, now I'm lucky in everything. How can I be? And then I live in Egypt, which there's a lot of people who are much more unjustly treated than I am. I'm very privileged. So then it hit me. And then now what happened with the beauty about this is once you recognize it with the right word and it hits you and it resonates, every time I got the energy of I've been triggered, basically. So let's say I'm standing in a line and then something happens and I feel being triggered. I start thinking injustice. Where is the injustice? And in many cases, the injustice was someone taking my place in a line, or someone in a car going ahead of me, or someone saying something which is unjust, very slightly, yeah, because your subconscious feels it very fast, even faster than your mind. So then anytime I got triggered, I asked myself, where is injustice in this? Very soon I noticed that this injustice usually was not really injustice, or was something very on the periphery, and then slowly I noticed that there is no injustice, and then now it disappeared. So it took me a few incidents of I getting triggered and then reflecting, where then my mind taught myself that no, that's not injustice, man. That's not injustice. It's just someone took your space, and don't overact. So I think, and the same with incompetence. I mean, incompetence is the last one I figured out, and incompetence, it made me insecure in many things. And once I noticed that I thought I was incompetent, I started reflecting on that, and now it doesn't hit me. I'm for example, speaking to people, I was always, because in my mind I was incompetent. So anytime I would be on stage, naturally I would be worried before, and I would see how. Once I figured out that incompetence is just in my mind, and people don't see me as incompetent, and now it's very clear that most people actually see me as quite competent, I don't have this fear anymore. So I think it dissolves a lot of the issues you have just by recognizing in the right word this decision you made as a kid. And once you know it and it resonates with you, that's why the word is very important. Once incompetent was the word, I suddenly, it resolved many of my issues, and life became much easier for me.
Much happier also.
Much happier, I'd say.
Of course, no Maslow, better happiness, yeah? More happiness.
I mean, in the end of the day, I think justice will always be an issue. Not necessarily in like I am being unjustly treated, but if I see injustice anywhere in the world, if I see someone being unjustly treated, it will always trigger me. The same with incompetence. Yeah, of course. There is still a scar. So if someone would attack me, it didn't happen yet since I figured it out, but I'm imagining it's still a weak point. I mean, yeah, now it's more rational. It's more, instead of being in the subconscious, it's more in the conscious, so I can deal with it in a more rational way. So I will not be triggered the way I was before. However, it's still a thing. I mean, it's still, if my wife pushes me enough in something I'm doing badly, I will still be triggered, and I will still argue. And then later I'll be like, come on, man, you're still in this incompetence, So it still is there. I wouldn't say it will always be a scar, but you treat it and you deal with it much nicer if it's in the conscious realm rather than the unconscious realm, subconscious realm.
Exactly. I think, the antidote to limiting beliefs is taking action and started, gathering feedback and realizing that you're not as bad as you think you are. You're not. And, so all these, action, results, feedback, and all these things, I think, kind of form a cycle. And then you're like, okay, I'm not that bad in public speaking. Actually, I was quite good at it. And then you start to gain the confidence, and then you do it again and you do it better. And I think, action and results, good results, is very, very important when it comes to, defeating, let's say, and combating these limiting beliefs. Do you agree with that?
I agree. I agree 100%. But I just am of the agreement of the opinion that you need to figure out. So let me tell you my 3-4 steps of how to fight that. So step number 1 is to notice when you get triggered, because you naturally, as humans, we have the fight, flight, or hide concepts, which we got from our ancestors, but we still have it in everyday situations. And if you get triggered by finding yourself fighting something, or by finding yourself trying to avoid something, or finding yourself, then this triggers is the first step that makes you notice that there is something there which you need to work on, because otherwise you would not be triggered. So if same situations happens to me and you, I would be triggered and you wouldn't, which means that this trigger touched something inside. So that's the first step, is notice the triggers. Step number 2 is starting to talk to people who know you well and that you feel safe talking to them, and trying to figure out where this trigger came from. So, for example, a situation happened and you got triggered and your best friend was there. Then you could talk to her later and ask her, hey, I really got triggered there. I was trying to figure out what is the decision so that made me triggered. And you try to come up with the sentence that starts with I am. So you say, for example, you try to figure it out. Is the limiting belief that I am stupid? So, for example, then you start to, no, it doesn't, and it will resonate. The beauty is you talk to people, and you keep noticing. So because you will be triggered more than once. So every time you get triggered, you try to find a link, and you talk to people, and you try to, until you reach somehow that I am whatever. I am weak. Sometimes it could be I'm strong. It doesn't necessarily, it's still limiting, because if you think you're strong, you will do things that will still, does not come from, so whatever it is. And then after that, once you figure out what it is, it will start to you will feel it, and then you start to research it. So you start to go to YouTube movies about this topic. So for example, injustice. You start, understanding injustice and understanding what makes injustice, and understanding yourself, what happened to you to say and so you continue to study this whole topic after you figure it out, and start and reflect on your own and talk to people, until eventually it will just lose its grip on you. Because what will happen is, every time you'll be triggered after this exercise, you will automatically go back to I am weak, for example, and then you will, all this research and all this talking to people will automatically put you in a place where you're like, no, I'm not weak. And slowly 1, 2, 3, 4 situations where you face this with conscious light, or conscious view on this trigger. Once, twice, 3 times, the trigger won't come again, because you will teach yourself that this trigger is not a trigger. It's a belief that you had, and that actually does not make sense anymore, because you faced it and you dealt with it, and it will go away, until maybe there will be still a small scar that will come if you're very weak, but in general it will not trigger you anymore. So I
like your steps.
This is what I do.
Methodology. I like
exactly. This is a. I mean, honestly, I think it worked for me by chance, and it worked for me through this teacher of mine, Mayana, who really helped me. And once, I think the trick, the magic, is that you get the right word in your language that describes what this is, because the word is so powerful, Georgina. You wouldn't believe it. I mean, in my case, I struggled a lot. I knew it has something to do with unfairness, injustice, being the victim, but it never worked. When I say I'm a victim, no, I don't think I am. I am being unfairly treated. No. Once I said it in Arabic, "Ana mazloom," it just made so much sense. It just hit me like, of course, that's how I'm feeling. And so I think it takes time to get it, but once you get it, it's like light on your situations, just sheds, and you become much more able to deal with it.
Exactly. And in psychotherapy, we have this fantastic technique. I use it all the time with my clients. It's called cognitive restructuring. And basically, you get to identify all the episodes, like all the events in which they had conflict with another person that triggered them, as you say. And then you find the common denominator, and you identify the belief, and then you find the balancing belief. So, for example, in my case, so I'm not good enough became I'm more than good enough. So it really becomes not only balancing belief, it can actually bring you a lot of strength and courage and take you even further,
So I agree 100%. I mean, I'm not very much pro mantras that are positive without deep, deep rooted. So people who just say, I mean, so that's why I love what you just said, because you start off with touching on the limited beliefs very deeply, and then naturally what happened to me is naturally the other side becomes very clear. So yeah, I believe that I'm even more than just, I mean, I'm very lucky, but it took me to say the sentence and to see how contrast it is with the reality. And then, so for me, naturally, I look out of the window and I look at everyone else. I'm like, wow, I'm way luckier than these guys, because I have so much going for me. So then now I tell myself I'm very lucky, and it really resonates. But it came after, as you said, after looking at the other side and identifying it, and then going and saying I'm lucky. Then it makes sense. But some people in the new age, thinking go to just say I'm lucky, I'm lucky, I'm lucky, and you will believe it. Which, yeah, maybe short term you will. But if you don't go to the core and don't solve the actual belief, then maybe it will be a remedy for a meeting, but it will not be something that will solve it for life.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Well, my steps are understand, identify your limiting belief, and then start taking action. And then, see the results for yourself, gather feedback, and then try again. So, build confidence and momentum. And then you are in a situation of flow because, when you're enjoying things and not really thinking them too much. And then you somehow immerse in the flow of things. And then you become good at it eventually. So I think the limiting belief somehow starts to, it's not that we don't hear it. You might hear it, but you just learn to ignore it at the end of the day and just do your thing,
Yeah, no, I love that. I think it's almost the same as, it's very similar. But when you say take action, how would you take action?
Right. Let me give you an example. So somebody might think that might have the limiting belief, I'm a failure. Okay. So if this person was my client, I would tell him, okay, so now I want you to take some meaningful action that will prove the exact opposite, that you're not a failure. What would that be? So he would say, okay, so maybe, I get this role. Maybe I become the CEO of the company. So he applies for that role and he gets that role. So, immediately he has taken meaningful action that counteracts his limiting belief. So, he starts. That's what I mean. So I think the action needs to be always somehow related to the limiting belief,
I like this a lot. It makes sense. So basically, you prove to yourself through action that your limiting belief is just your belief. Because if it was a truth, you would never be able to get this position. So if you apply for it and get it, then naturally you are fighting it with something much stronger than what's in your mind. I like this a lot.
But of course, you have no idea how resistant they can be initially before they take the action. Yeah,
I can imagine, and especially if it happens that they try to take the action and it backfires by them failing to take the position, it will even reinforce more that, hey, you see, I am incompetent, or I am but I see that usually they will be able, because I think limiting beliefs, as we said earlier, has the positive side of making you stronger somewhere. Because if you have a limited belief in something, it will strengthen something else. So usually people with limiting belief get much stronger at the thing they think they are limited at. So
exactly.
In many cases, I agree with you. Just go try and see what will happen. And usually they will prove themselves that actually they're good at it.
Exactly. And you know what? We are the worst judges of ourselves. Like, our mindset can be our biggest, our greatest friend or our greatest enemy. So it's up to us to decide whether our mindset, whether we want our mindset to be a friend or an enemy. It's basically a decision that we're making here.
And that's one of the other tough ones that maybe require a full, which is this whole self-talk. Self-talk is, we are so tough on ourselves. I am so tough on myself. The things I used to, maybe until now, but the thing I used to say to myself was, I would never say this to anyone else. I'm a very kind person outside, but when it comes to myself, I used to tell myself this word, like, you're stupid, a lot. It's stupid stuff, basically. Like, you drop some water. The first thing I say is, like, you're so stupid. And then, like this accumulation of speak. And the problem that I faced is that because this is the way I talk to myself, naturally, it was the first thing I would say to my kids if I'm upset with them. So I would say my kids things that I would come and reflect, and I would never tell this to anyone else. And I would only tell this to myself. But it's wrong to tell it to myself. And it's even worse to tell it to your kids. So I think one of the reasons why people have to fix this self-talk is because it will come out to people closest to you who are almost yourself. So a wife, a husband, a boyfriend, a girlfriend, a son, a mother. Like, for example, my discussions with my mother and father, I would be tougher than I would be with everyone else, which is now not anymore, because now I recognize that that's a sickness. But I'm just saying, I agree with you. Self-talk is another chapter is another rabbit hole.
Let's do another video podcast on self-compassion, because I think, like, the vast majority of very successful people struggle a lot with self-compassion. They're very,
Agree.
they beat themselves
Agree.
up. They become so harsh and punitive. I mean, the words that we say to ourselves, seriously, would you tell that to anyone else? I don't think so.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was lovely discussing with you, Ibrahim. And
Same here, Georgina. It was really a pleasure.
it was a pleasure discussing about limiting beliefs and their spell. And so thank you very much. And let's have another video podcast soon.
For sure. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Take
Bye.
care.